My name is Sabrina, and at 31 years old, I stood in front of the mirror, fastening the clasp of my necklace, telling myself, tonight might be different. My parents have finally reached out after months of clip conversations and sit-along glances across board tables. Dinner at the estate. Just the three of us, no distractions. For a moment, I let myself believe it meant reconciliation, a truce, maybe even a chance to be their daughter again instead of their opponent. I slipped my arms into my coat when my phone buzzed. 3 words glare on the screen. Call me immediately. No greeting, no context. The sender, Corwin. My stomach nodded as I dialed. He answered on the first ring. His voice clipped. Urgent. Sabrina, they filed the petition this morning. Emergency conservatorship. Thaddeus and Iris are claiming you're mentally incompetent to run the company. The air went out of me. My coat slipped from my hands and landed on the hardwood with a soft thud. What? They've attached witness statements. Affidavit. It's not just talk anymore. They want legal control. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. I thought of my mother's gentle invitation. Let's talk about the future. And the way my father had smiled with thin politeness when he passed me at the last board meeting. I thought it meant progress. Instead, it was preparation. They planned this, I whispered, though it was less a statement than the slow recognition of a trap. Corwin didn't soften his words. Yes, and they're moving fast. The lemon tarts I bought on my way home sat in their box on the counter. Suddenly absurd. A peace offering meant for parents who had already decided to erase me. I sank onto the edge of the bench by the door, pulse hammering, and stared at the phone still glowing in my hand, knowing I couldn't walk blindly into that dinner. It was never an invitation. It was an ambush, and I had just stepped into their game. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I could still hear my mother's voice from 3 days earlier, lilting with warmth I hadn't heard in months. Honey, let's talk about the future. Just dinner, the 3 of us. It had sounded like a thread sewn into something torn, a chance to believe we might find our way back to each other. I wanted so badly to believe it that I stopped at the little bakery near my old school and bought lemon tarts, the kind she used to sneak onto my plate when I was a girl. Now, with Corwin's words echoing in my head, the memory soured. That gentle tone, that invitation, it had been rehearsed. They hadn't wanted my company. They had wanted my compliance. I sank deeper into the bench and let other moments resurface, ones I had brushed off at the time. My father cutting me off mid-sentence during a quarterly meeting, finishing my point as if I hadn't spoken at all. My mother's light laugh in front of the staff. Sabrina forgets things lately. But don't we all? Everyone chuckled, and I forced myself to smile too, pretending it was harmless. But it wasn't harmless. It was steady erosion. I had excused it as tension, as age, as family dynamics. I told myself I was imagining it because the alternative was too painful, that the people who raised me were slowly sanding down my credibility in public while feeding me scraps of affection in private. I walked into my kitchen and opened the bakery box. The lemon tarts looked the same as always, golden crusts, sugar tops. I pressed the lid shut with trembling hands and shoved it aside. They weren't a gesture of love anymore. They were evidence of how willingly I had walked into their setup. The phone still lay in my lap, Corwin's warning burning in my ears, and I realized I couldn't afford to be the daughter who wanted peace. I had to be something else entirely, because sentiment had just turned into ammunition. Corwin slid a folder across his desk, its weight heavier than the paper inside could possibly justify. I opened it, my hands stiff, and the first words pulled the air from my lungs. Petition for emergency conservatorship of Alan Marcellus. I forced myself to read each line, though every sentence landed like a bruise. Erratic leadership, emotional decline, inability to sustain judgment in high-pressure environments. Statements signed by people I had once trusted. Witness affidavit claiming I'd forgotten key dates, dismissed data, and relied on emotional whims. The language was clinical, but I could hear my parents' voices behind every accusation. Corwin watched quietly, letting me take it in before he spoke. They didn't do this alone. 2 investors have already signaled support. They want a familiar name, your parents, to reassure them. Stability over vision. I closed the folder, fingers pressed hard into the cardboard. So, they trade me for appearances. Their own daughter. He didn't offer comfort. That wasn't his role. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice level. They're moving quickly. If the court grants temporary control, they could freeze your access to company accounts by the end of the week. This is not theoretical, Sabrina. It's already in motion. I tried to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat, but it sat there thick and immovable. I thought of every sacrifice, late nights, missed holidays, the steady climb through recessions and setbacks, only for my parents to claim I was unfit, not out of concern for me, but out of fear for themselves. The folder still sat open between us, my name stamped in bold like a target. I looked at Corwin, his steady gaze meeting mine, and felt the shift begin. This wasn't about disappointment anymore. It was survival. I slid the folder back toward him, my voice steadier than I felt. Then we fight. I sat at my kitchen table long after the sun had slipped behind the skyline, the petition still echoing in my head. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. But my mind was loud with memories I tried to bury. I thought of the last quarterly meeting when a board member leaned toward me and said, "Your father mentioned you've been overwhelmed. Maybe it's time to pace yourself." At the time, I laughed it off, but the memory landed differently now. My parents had been feeding doubts into ears, already eager for an easier story. Other fragments came back, small and sharp, a young associate offering to clarify my own projections, as if I couldn't read the numbers I'd built. A department head hesitating before answering my questions, waiting to see if Iris or Thaddeus would speak first. I had brushed it all aside, telling myself I was imagining it, that I was tired. My eyes drifted to the bakery box on the counter. The lemon tarts looked perfect and touched, but they mocked me now. They weren't sweet reminders of childhood. They were proof of how easily nostalgia had blinded me. I had walked into their trap, smiling, arms full of peace offerings, while they sharpened knives behind closed doors. A chill slid through me as the worst thoughts surfaced. What if the board believed them? What if my years of precision and discipline were erased by a handful of affidavit and a rehearsed narrative? The idea wrapped tight round my chest, pressing until my breath came shallow. I pressed my palms flat against the table and forced myself upright. Fear was dangerous, but denial had been worse. I couldn't afford either anymore. If my parents were willing to fracture me piece by piece, then I would have to find the cracks in their arm or two. By Thursday afternoon, I had forced myself back into the office, though the walls felt different now, as if even the glass carried whispers. I moved through the corridors with my chin lifted, determined not to let anyone see how much my hands trembled when I closed my office door. My parents' petition had cracked something, but it hadn't broken me. Not yet. I was gathering reports for Corwin when there was a faint knock. Rowan Vale, one of the junior accountants, lingered in the doorway, barely out of school. He usually kept to himself, polite and diligent in ways that rarely drew attention. But now his shoulders were stiff, his eyes darting to the hallway before he stepped inside. He held a folded piece of paper like it burned to touch. "Miss Marcellus," he whispered, his voice low enough that I had to lean forward. "I think you should see this." I reached for it, the tremor in his fingers betraying the risk he felt. He didn't wait for me to open it, just backed toward the door. "Please don't say it came from me." Then he was gone. I unfolded the sheet, and the breath left my lungs. An email printed from the company's server. Subject line, pre-transition support. The body was short, direct. "Once we assume interim control, bonuses will be distributed accordingly. Signed, Iris Marchellis." I read it twice, then a third time, the words cutting sharper with each pass. Interim control. Not if, but when. Bonuses promised in exchange for loyalty. This wasn't concern for my health or the company's future. This was bribery dressed in polite font. I pressed the page flat against my desk, my pulse pounding. All this time I had been telling myself I was overthinking, that the small slights were accidents. But here it was in black and white, premeditated corruption. And Rowan, quiet, overlooked Rowan had chosen to bring it to me. He could have stayed silent. Silence would have been easier, safer, even profitable if those bonuses were real. But he hadn't. He had seen the truth and handed it over, trembling, but resolute. Something in me studied for the first time in days. I felt a flicker of clarity. If even one young accountant had the courage to stand against them, then I had no excuse to falter. I slipped the email into a folder marked evidence and knew the fight had shifted. My parents weren't just undermining me. They were buying their future, and I had just been handed the thread to unravel it all. I didn't wait for another summons. I drove to the estate the next evening and walked into the study where both of them sat, firelight casting their faces in soft amber. For a moment they looked like the parents I remembered. My father with his heavy brow, my mother with her careful smile. But the words that followed belonged to strangers. "Sabrina," Iris began, her tone gentle enough to pass for kindness. "We never wanted this to feel adversarial. You've done incredible things, but everyone has their time. We just want to make this transition graceful for you." Thaddeus leaned forward, folding his hands as though we were discussing whether better to leave before questions are asked. "We can keep this quiet. Let you step down with dignity. Mercy is what this is, daughter. Mercy." The word hit me like ice. My throat tightened, but I forced it open. "You filed a petition behind my back. You told the court I'm incompetent. That isn't mercy. It's a mask, and I have the receipts." For the first time, their expression shifted. Iris's smile flickered, and Thaddeus's jaw hardened, but neither admitted anything. They simply exchanged a glance, one I had seen 1,000 times when they presented a united front to the world. I didn't stay longer. Any conversation beyond that would only give them ground. I turned and walked out, my heels echoing against marble, my pulse steady in a way it hadn't been for weeks. Later, in my own office, I began combing through the company's financial records with a sharper eye than ever. That was when the numbers began to glow like embers in a dark room. A payment of $12,000 to a strategic advisory firm no one had heard of. Another $8,500 to a so-called consultant abroad with no reports, no deliverables, no trail of actual work. I sat back, staring at the screen, the figures screaming louder than words ever could. Fraud wasn't suspicion anymore. It was undeniable, logged, and time-stamped. My parents hadn't just tried to take me down with a story. They were funding their betrayal with stolen money. And with every document I saved into my growing file, I knew the facade of mercy was cracking, leaving only the raw steel of strategy behind it. By the weekend, my office no longer looked like a workspace. It looked like a bunker. Every surface was covered with binders and folders, each labeled in block letters: medical evaluations, revenue growth, client retention, staff commendations. I built the wall of evidence brick by brick, the way I had built the company itself, patiently, precisely, without shortcuts. I laid out the clean medical reports first, signed by two specialists confirming what I already knew. No cognitive decline, no impairment, no reason to doubt my ability to lead. Then came 3 years of revenue records, charts that told a story numbers never lie about. Growth steady, margins healthy, expansion real. On another table, I spread client contracts and personal notes of thanks. Their signatures proved that my leadership wasn't just ceremonial. When fatigue pressed in, I forced myself to watch the recording of my keynote at the Leadership Summit last year. 40 minutes without a single note. Every fact and figure delivered with precision. I remembered the standing ovation at the end, the rush of pride when strangers recognized what my parents had long dismissed. As I replayed it, I didn't see sentiment. I saw clarity. That woman was still me. Corwin stood across from me late one night, his tie loosened, eyes narrowing as he scanned the stacks. "This is good," he said, tapping one binder. "But remember, they may stage evidence. fabricated anecdotes, coached witnesses. Be ready for noise. I nodded, sliding another set of files into place. Let them try. Numbers don't shake when questioned. I straightened, surveying the fortress I had built. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore. The lemon tarts, the memories, the longing for reconciliation, those were ashes now. What stood before me was my arsenal, and the courtroom was waiting. The next step was no longer survival. It was war. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and colder, the kind of place where truth was supposed to cut sharper than sentiment. I walked in steady, dressed in black, while across the aisle, my parents had already staged their tableau. Iris wore cream, soft and composed, her expression carefully painted in maternal calm. Thaddeus sat beside her, spine straight, projecting the air of a dignified patriarch burdened with a difficult duty. Their lawyer began with practiced sorrow. "This is not about animosity," he said, gesturing toward them. "This is about concern. My clients are loving parents who have watched their daughters decline with growing alarm, erratic decision-making, emotional instability. They acted not out of ambition, but necessity." I kept my hands folded, listening to the fiction they spun in public. Every word was polished, but the undertone was unmistakable, pity disguised as truth. Then it was Corwin's turn. He rose calmly, no theatrics, and began sliding binders across the bench. "Your Honor, the respondent has been medically evaluated by 2 specialists within the last 18 months. Both reports confirm no signs of cognitive decline." He opened the folder, pages stamped and signed. Another binder landed next, filled with 3 years of revenue growth, client retention, and expansion deals, all benchmarked above industry standards. The room rustled as charts and contracts were passed forward. Finally, Corwin sat down a stack of financial records, his voice sharpened to precision. "And here we have documentation of unauthorized payments. $12,000 to a shell firm, $8,500 to a consultant abroad. These transfers were approved by the petitioners disguised as company expenses." The judge flipped through the pages slowly before lifting his gaze. His voice was steady, but it landed like a hammer. "You accuse your daughter of incompetence while using her company's funds against her." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Iris faltered, her hands tightening on her lap. Thaddeus opened his mouth, stammered, and fell silent. For the first time, their carefully constructed illusion began to crack, and I knew the stage was shifting beneath their feet. The judge's words cut through the air with finality. The petition was dismissed, and with it the lie my parents had been rehearsing for months. But the gavel didn't just protect me, it turned on them. A review of their financial misconduct was ordered. The very fraud they thought they could bury now dragging them into the light. By evening, the board had called an emergency session. I sat at the head of the table, Corwin at my side, while the members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Corwin's voice was calm as he presented the evidence piece by piece. The loyalty test emails Iris had sent, the payments to shell firms, the bonuses promised in exchange for silence. Each document passed across the polished wood landed like a verdict. When the discussion ended, there was no debate left. The vote was swift, unanimous. Thaddeus and Iris were stripped of all authority, their names removed from positions they had once worn like crowns. For the first time, they had no stage, no script, no power. Across the table, Iris leaned forward, her voice trembling just enough to sound almost sincere. "We only wanted what was best." I met her eyes, my voice steady. "You wanted what was yours. I built what was mine." She flinched and silence spread across the room. The board members turned toward me, waiting for direction. The moment that had once terrified me now faltered. The throne they had tried to seize was gone, and the weight of leadership rested back where it belonged. I signed the removal paperwork without hesitation, knowing the next chapter of this battle had already begun. 2 weeks later, I walked into the boardroom at 9, sharp. Every seat was filled, the air tight with anticipation. As I stepped inside, The members rose from their chairs in unspoken acknowledgement. It wasn't pity in their faces anymore. It was respect. I took my place at the head of the table, the chair that had once felt heavy with doubt. This time it felt like it had been made for me. I let the silence settle before I spoke. This company is my legacy. It was built on discipline, on endurance, on choices that were never easy, but always deliberate. From today forward, betrayal has consequences, family or not. No one argued. No one looked away. They simply nodded, some slowly, some with relief, as if the ground beneath us had finally steadied. For years, I had fought to prove my worth, even to the people who should have seen it first. Now, I didn't need to prove anything. The evidence, the courtroom, the unanimous vote, they had already done that. The meeting closed quickly. There were no drawn-out speeches, no applause, just clarity, clean and quiet. As I left the boardroom, the corridor stretched before me, bright with morning light. My heels clicked steadily against the floor until I reached the corner office my parents once occupied. The blinds were drawn, the desk cleared, the space stripped of their presence. I paused only long enough to recognize the emptiness for what it was. Not a loss, but a release. Then I kept walking. I didn't need their approval anymore. What they tried to erase, I had reclaimed. What they tried to own, I had defended. And in the end, I carried with me something stronger than inheritance.